Vichy, France. In the early days of World War II, when Germany seized control of France, the southern part of France decided that they would try to maintain their independence and not be part of occupied France under the German regime. In order to do this, in order to kind of secure this ability, what they decided to do, be without the German bequest, without the Germans asking, and before they had even discussed terms with the Germans, they gathered up 70,000 Jewish descent people living in southern France. They herded them into a velodrome in Drancy, and set them there as an internment camp. They then invited German SS soldiers to come, and the new French government offered to ship these Jewish soldiers anywhere that the SS would like, as a gift to the German High Command. Many have claimed in order to secure the independence of France, or what we call Vichy France. Of those 70,000 Jewish people, 2,500 lived through the war. We tend not to think about France having a role in the Holocaust, but they did. Now, that's not our story for today. Our story is of how people dealt with being French after the war, but this is a good indication of what we're talking about. We know most of what happened in the war. The Nazi regime controlling Germany attempted to expand. A world war ensued, which eventually led to the fall of the German government. Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin kind of trying to come to an agreement, which did not go so well, hence the Cold War, which we will discuss soon enough. And the splitting of Germany, in fact, the splitting of the entirety of Europe into Western democratic republic zones and Eastern communist authoritarian zones. But what's more fascinating to me is what happened in France, specifically in Vichy France, and how people attempted to deal with it afterwards. Because people have called it Vichy syndrome. You see, that southern part of France did remain an independent country, controlled by what was considered to be a fascist leader named Marshal Philippe Pétain, who was the hero of Verdun. He's a father figure throughout France after World War I, considered to be one of the greatest men of the age. He allied himself with Germany. He provided soldiers to Germany. In fact, Vichy France was a direct ally of Germany and the Nazi regime. Now, after the war, he will claim that he saved France, that he kept the Germans out, and he did what he had to maintain France as a country. But there's a man who didn't agree with that. His name was Charles de Gaulle. We have Marshal Philippe Pétain. And he actually spent most of the war in England. At the famous Battle of Dunkirk, he was evacuated out, and along with 300,000 French soldiers, he stayed in England, then participated in the invasions of Normandy. The English and American governments allowed him to march in at the head of the armies into Paris to quote-unquote liberate Paris. Now, they really didn't have a huge part in the fighting. They were there at Normandy, but they had a smaller role. But the Americans and English thought that a Frenchman should liberate Paris, and in that case liberate France, so that France will be an ally afterwards in what people were thinking was going to shape us up as the Cold War. Well, that was the question, though. Who was the true hero of France? Was it Charles de Gaulle, who resisted, who fought against the Nazis? Or was it Philippe Pétain, who fought with the Nazis, but in the process managed to hold together France? This was the issue of the Vichy syndrome, and it went beyond just these two men. Because the question is, what about all those people in Vichy France? Who resisted and who allied with, who collaborated with the Nazis at the end of the war? Well, we always hear about the Great French Resistance, but the beginning of the French Resistance was these were criminals. These were people who were going to go to jail anyways. They were criminals who went to the mountains. There was a very small group of people, misfits and marginals. After the invasion of Russia by the Nazi regime, you have this uprising of working class communists in France. And these people join the resistance, but they don't join the resistance until about halfway through the war. So do those guys count? Later on, you have a larger resistance. But fighting those 45,000 resistance people towards the end of the war was about 50,000 Vichy France policemen who ended up hunting down and killing most of these resistance fighters. But in the process, they secured France. So what does it take to resist? Did you have to actually kill people to resist? Did you have to just run to the woods and live for 6 years to resist? Or, if you didn't actually aid them, did you resist? Or if you supported France, did you resist? Who were the good guys and who were the bad guys in France? Charles de Gaulle, when he came to power, gave the country a gift. He said in a famous speech, "We have all resisted." And in saying "we have all resisted," he gave all Frenchmen a pass. Doesn't matter whether they were supporters of the Nazis, doesn't matter whether they killed hundreds of Frenchmen. He said, "We have all resisted. We're going to ignore what happened. We are going to just move on and be Frenchmen." It's a great theory. But that doesn't compensate for the fact that 70,000 Jews were killed at Drancy. Because that doesn't sound like you were resisting the Holocaust, and certainly doesn't sound like you were not part of the Nazis. But this is one of the stories of World War I. 2. Take it for what it's worth.